Yeah, greetings everyone. My name is Francis Karugu, Principal Consultant at Revamp Consulting Limited, which is an affiliate of Docubox. It matters policy and monitoring and evaluation. Also a Global Justice Fellow at Yale University. And I have a power panel here that includes faces that we have seen since yesterday. On my far left is Julius Mbatia from Power Africa and climate activist. Next to him is Sharon Kibor from Christian Aid. And on my right is Judy Kibinge, Executive Director at Docubox. And on my far right is Sam Koko. Soko, yes. Filmmaker, Director, Producer. Welcome to this panel. And joining us online is Passy, Ogolla, Program Manager at SID. Should I call this the Moderators panel, where we are hitting the home stretch now. And I think what we need to talk about right about now is we've had power conversations since yesterday and this morning. Mm-hmm. And Judy, I just want to start with you because I heard you earlier today saying that we need to have a third day. What informed that? Why do we need a third day?
I just felt that every panel, here we are with Docubox. Our main role is we support independent filmmaking, independent storytellers, and we're filmmakers ourselves. And so to kind of get the chance to be immersed in these climate conversations, stripped from the data or all the things that cloud us from understanding what it's about. It's fascinating. It's really, really fascinating. And when you begin to understand how much can be done, if only we could get on the same page as far as conversations and a similar joint understanding is concerned. And I was feeling that thing coming together, and I thought, we're about to end. We need a third day.
Great. Passy, tell us, do we need a third day? And as we look at doing this again a year down the line, and maybe you could just, dig deeper into the conversation you had with Ude, Halima, and Martha yesterday. And as we do that, tell us, as we move into next year, who else do we need to bring on the stage to talk about green energy in Africa, Passy?
It's a pleasure to join you all today. I'm so sorry I miss you all on the ground, but technology has ensured that we're able to see each other. Do we need one more day? No, I think we need a whole week. It feels like this should be a conversation and a discourse that should continue going on and on and on. And just the panel we had yesterday, in very simple words for me, was very powerful, very informative, very inspirational, because we had even, the man who had nursed the water from Kenya joining the panel as well, Magiro. We had a scientist on the panel who was digging deep into some of the issues that we really don't understand or usually don't talk about. But we also had Halima Hussein, who brought in the legal aspect that tackles regulation, the energy laws, the parliamentary conversations that we should also be a part of. So for me, this conversation was not exclusive, yet there is still so much we need to talk about and so much we need to unpack and demystify in the energy climate nexus. And some of it is just as simple as distinguishing the difference between sustainable energy, clean energy, renewable energy, and green energy. These are 4 different terminologies that refer to energy, but that mean different things to different people. So a lot of the conversation still remains to happen. There's a lot of opportunity to bring in the whole system in the room. And just who is missing for next year's conversation? Academia, private sector. Where are the youth in the energy transition story? Where are the women? So that for me is just how much more we need to broaden the conversation and also look at what the foreign corporations are doing in the energy space in this continent. Thanks.
Wow. Thank you very much, Passy. Sharon, you had a great conversation, which was, incisive conversation with the community organizers. And my question to you is, now that we are almost drawing to a close this year's session, as we go into next year, are we talking to the right people as far as community organizers are concerned? And are we talking to communities or are we talking with communities? Yeah.
Thank you, Francis. I think with the conversations that happened yesterday, it was rather clear that we haven't been talking with the communities. I think in the past, the conversations have really been to the communities, telling the communities, this is what you need, this is what is important, this is how you should participate and get involved. But I think the narrative and the experience from yesterday's conversation is that communities want to collaborate. Communities want to be given a space where they are speaking to us and with us, so that it's a two-way conversation. Most importantly, the question on whether we are involving communities enough. Are we? I don't think so. Are there avenues that, from, for example, the Constitution, where communities are supposed to be involved? Yes, they are. But are we really involving them? Are we exploring those avenues in a way that is giving communities the prominence and the space that they need? So those really are the key questions. And I guess regarding who should also be involved in this conversation going forward, let's think about how we bring on board counties, because that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the conversations on development and prioritizing important projects and interventions happen. Looking at the funding that comes from taxpayers' money. This is communities' money. They should be able to have a say over how this money is being spent.
Wow, Sharon, thank you very much. Sam, you had another session with, participants from media, from, filmmakers, directors. And I would probably just take a few minutes and tell us, whom do you think we have not brought from that from that component?
I think that's a really interesting and good question, because even from hearing the feedback from the conversations that happened yesterday and continue to happen, I feel storytellers and stories like such an important component in transformation and engaging, and we need to have the backing of the public whom engage in story every day from different platforms through nowadays even from mobile phones. So the conversations we had today brought something really important to the fore, and I think everybody's saying we need to bring the communities together, we need to bring all the stakeholders together. However, we forget that at the core of what you're trying to communicate, you're trying to tell a story. And one thing that came up in the morning was that we've had this habit where we engage with storytellers at the tail end. Once we've made up our minds, we've come up with the reports, we have all these great things we want to engage, that's when we're like, now you tell them what we've said. And the storytellers were like, no, we also want to look good when we're telling these things. We also want to communicate and engage communities effectively. And our work, the main tenet of our work is based on, we start with the community. We actually ask the community, how do you want to hear this? How do you want to listen? Can you understand what I'm saying? So there's, for instance, things like when you're speaking about emissions and energy, those words don't have translation with the communities you're trying to communicate with. So there's important work that needs to go into listening to each other, listening to the storytellers and the communicators. And these storytellers are not only the journalists who work in this space, the filmmakers who work in this space, the writers who work in this space. And these people work with different demographics. They communicate with children, they communicate with the elderly, they communicate with women, they communicate with different people in these spaces. And you need those people at the table from a very early point of engagement. They're not people that you engage with at a monitoring and evaluation space. And I think that's something that was very clear, and I feel it's an important piece to the puzzle.
Wow. Thank you, Sam. Julius, we in the morning we had the conversation about climate finance and the money. So this time next year, will we be talking about the same things?
Interesting foretelling, and I wouldn't want it to be we're talking about the same thing. What I would want to see is us talking about the possibilities that are there to actually unlock, tap into, and access finance, because then that is when transformation can genuinely happen. But just to come back a bit, we need to appreciate the fact that that is a conversation which we are having, just to say, for the first time within the public space, at such a high level, just to also put it that way, because then we brought together a community person, we brought together a researcher, we brought together a government person, an expert in climate finance issues, and we also brought together someone from the civil society organizations. So all of these people do meet apart from the community person. So they barely meet the community person on a day-to-day basis. But the other colleagues we do meet, we are friends actually in the circle. So how about building friendships that actually also want to solve the problem of why the money, where the money, and how to even access the money? All right? So the biggest bit about this conversation moving forward is, how do we pull ourselves back and want to ask the difficult question around co-creating solutions that would actually enable a community person overcome the barriers that we talked about today, that would also enable a government person curate programming that really reflects the ambitions of the people and the public themselves, and also reflects the needs of communities. Remember what the community person said? They actually said, if the problem is at our local place, we can actually tell you what the solution would look like. You don't do designing just at the high level and expect that to be owned by us at the local level. And that is a very interesting statement, because then unless you have insight into what the problem is at the root, we cannot talk about transformational change. So the kind of discourse we are looking at in the next 1 year should be, how do we make transformational change a reality? How do we make access to finance? How do we actually allow finance to move to the people who need it the most? The communities, the mamamboga, how we use it in this country, Wanjiko, how we call it, the common wananchi. How do we actually also allow finance to get to the creative space and allow filmmakers and also allow journalists, if I can put them also in that list, to access financing that enables them generate stories? Because then also that should be climate finance. Why? Because we want people to be aware. Unless we are aware, we cannot act on the problem. So I am looking at a 2022 that is really transformational, if I would call it, but we have actually just started.
Precisely. Passy, let me come back to you again, and we are talking about, and I think we have found a weak link in the interconnectedness of the players and actors in this space. So what do you think are the incentives that would bring these actors in this climate debate together as we go into the next year and into the future? What is your take on that, Passy?
I think a lot of the times, the different key stakeholders in the sector, and I speak specifically to the energy sector, is the fact that we are each doing different things in our different spaces of influence, but what each stakeholder is doing in that different space directly affect what another stakeholder is doing. Or if there was an opportunity to synergize, they would have a bigger impact and a bigger influence. So for us, we always try to have an a linkage. How can academia and the research being done around sustainable energy in our university impact policy that the policymakers are making in the different areas of leadership? How can that same academia use the research that's coming out of the university to support the private sector to be able to better plan for the future? And then you have the media, who is also a key stakeholder, and that brings in also the creatives that we've been talking and engaging with these 2 days, and they literally share or disseminate those stories, those initiatives, those reports, those research. So they're very, very key. How do we bring them in? And for them, it's an issue of content. What are we publishing? What are we airing? Some of these films that we've watched today, how can we better disseminate them so that we're bringing the general public on board? We're feeding into the work policy is doing, academia and private sector. And I think the moment we can see that our work is interconnected and can have a greater impact, then we have reached the mark and the incentive. So instead of seeing our work as silos and separate from each other, it's an opportunity to see that we truly have the same interest and we can come together to have a greater impact. But I don't think we're there yet. We're on the right path, but there's an opportunity to do it better. So I'm very encouraged that Docubox and this Climate Story Lab Africa has actually brought some of us together, people who would usually not sit in the same platform and discuss these issues. We need more of this. And the excitement and the questions and the learning and the inspiration that is coming out of it will naturally usher us into that desirable future that we're creating in our different spaces.
Great. Thank you, Passy. Sam, I want to come back to you again on, because we've been running these last 2 days on the platform of art and culture, media, and I'd want you to speak to what are the pieces or what are the incentives from both the demand and the supply of media and media actors that would help us, intensify this conversation even in the future?
That's a really good question, and I think number one, just to put it out there, money. The storytelling is as intensive and it is as important as every other cog to this whole conversation. And the way you engage in with money is not only money for like, here's the money, go tell the story. It's from a capacity building point of view, in that all the terminologies and everything that's happening, everything that's working, we are not experts in the space. And I feel a lot of filmmakers don't necessarily, or storytellers don't necessarily want to be experts in the space, but they want to engage and find this knowledge. And there has to be financial incentive for them to engage in that space to understand what's happening and what's taking place. But then the other thing is financing in the process of doing the work. And in this, financing is not the one for, there's this memes that always make rounds of like, client expectation and client budget. So we always have the expectation of, we want you to tell a story that's going to change the world, but I will only buy you lunch. Those two things don't go hand in hand. And that kind of, whenever you're thinking about financing for whatever conversation or project that's going to take place, then it's important to look at it from a highly holistic point of view. Another thing that I think is important for us to seriously think and consider and work on moving forward is empowering communities to tell their stories. Not necessarily investing in quote-unquote outsiders to come to tell the story of what is happening here. It is, one of the panelists we had was a filmmaker from a community that is, whose story is seldom told, whose story we seldom hear. But they have a greater understanding of what's happening in the community. They have a greater respect of what's happening in the community. And they're like the best person to tell that story. So invest in that storyteller, in that filmmaker to tell that story. Otherwise, we will constantly be hearing narratives that are told by other people based on their notions and perceptions of what's taking place, which is very different. And that covers more spaces, more than the climate change space. But because of how important climate change is in our world right now and how we have to engage in it immediately, then it's important for us to engage and invest in those storytellers, in those communities, in their different platforms, right? Lastly is we need to adapt to what's taking place, and particularly the media models that are taking place. A lot more people access their content through, for instance, mobile phones and mobile platforms. Say a platform like TikTok, for example. What are we trying to do to engage in those platforms? And we're not trying to reduce a 10-page document into a TikTok video. You can't do that. So how do you engage with the storytellers and be like, this is what I'm trying to say, and work together and be like, okay, perhaps this is how we can engage in these platforms.
Wow. Thank you very much, Sam. Sharon, let me come back to you again, and let's talk women and youth. What do you think needs to happen, or what bits and pieces do we need to bring into this conversation to make sure that we are involving women and youth as we talk about climate and climate change?
Thank you very much, Francis, for that question. I think one of the key things that came off our conversation yesterday was that the panel was kind of representative, but maybe not very youthful. It was more of a gender panel than it thought about youth. But I think from that conversation, we could tell that women and men, youth, children, the different segments of the population have different experiences with regards to how climate change is impacting their lives. So for us to bring them on board, I think there are tried ways that communities themselves have sort of implemented. So for example, ensuring that during public participation processes and spaces at the county, you have a real representation. And when I talk of real representation, I'm not saying you just have women sitting in the space, but that women actually have an opportunity to speak out. So there's quite a bit of work to be done behind the scenes where you prepare the women and the youth so that they are able to share in confidence, but also specific issues that have actually been thought through by women and youth and communities and agreed upon. So during one of the sessions with the climate finance conversation, someone talked about some vulnerability assessments that are done. That really gives communities a clear view of how these impacts affect the different segments in the community. So I think, as it's been mentioned, money is critical in doing some of these things behind the scenes, but also just creating those spaces where now they can make this presentation and say, this is what is important to us, and this is how we think it can be solved. Remember, they are the custodians of even the solutions to the challenges that they are facing. The other opportunity, I think, is to change our perceptions as CSOs, as counties, as national governments, as all the players really, towards how we see communities. You know, we make assumptions that communities do not know. We make assumptions that there is no knowledge within communities, especially communities that are marginalized. But really, these communities have had different ways of surviving. Why are we not making use of this indigenous knowledge and strategies and experiences and seeing how they could, be aligned to county planning processes and influencing development as a whole, not just for climate change, but development as a whole in a way that is sustainable. So I would say those are the two key things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Judy, let me come back to you. And from a facilitator's point of view, we are talking action. We are talking action planning. And, Docubox having been able to, of course with other partners, being able to pull off this event. How does the next 12 months look like? And what kind of collaborations do you think would be useful in, taking this conversation into the action level?
I mean, I think the first thing that we have to do is probably take a deep breath, and just listen, really us, go through our transcripts, talk about the sparks that was set off, so rather than rushing into act, just to take that moment. As we were talking, I was thinking about just a very unlikely conversation, actually, that Passy and I had yesterday, right after the event. And she has to come in on this one, because who would ever have known that she was, she really deals with African futures, and this takes the form of African sci-fi, plays a role in this. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about 10 years from now. What's that going to look like? It's interesting. In researching for this particular conference, I was looking through the novels, the fictional novels that are being written by writers anywhere in the world about the ways in which the world is changing, climate and so on. They're all from the West, and they're all being released like this. There's at least 15 books on this whole apocalyptic world and what climate will do and how the weather will change. And somehow the things that we read, the things that we absorb, the things that we feel emotion about are the things that actually provoke action. And so when Passy was just telling me these fascinating scenarios that at SID she's been working on these African future scenarios and other young African thinkers who understand, for instance, the impact and the power of story. And that story can be fiction, but it's fiction based on a very real foundation of present truth. So for me, I don't know what these things are, things are going to set off. But for instance, next time, I can see Passy and I curating an African sci-fi series every afternoon. We do the mornings, we do the talks, and then in the afternoon we show an African sci-fi film. Or we have a writer, an African sci-fi writer, come and read from his novel or spoken word, and we talk about what this means. We see if how we can turn it into these bigger a blockbuster film that will make us really sit up and have a real, an even deeper conversation the next time. And we've seen the power also of just these great documentary films that have been made, whether it was 15, 16 years ago in Inconvenient Truth, more recently, Thank You for the Rain, not around climate justice, but around justice. Your film, Softy. We've seen the power of what happens when you take a story and you put it on a big screen and many people watch this together. And so I just hope everyone who's watching, whether they're working from NGO or government or whether they're philanthropists, whatever country, whether they're in Guinea or Benin or Ghana or Nigeria, because we know all those were signed up, or South Africa. Let's talk, guys. Let's talk. Tell us, what do you want? What do you want to see us? How do you want to collaborate with us next year? Because I think we have to be back next year, right?
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Judy. Yesterday in the green energy debate, we were grappling with the question of how can we introduce like a multiplier effect to have Magiro power lookalikes. Many of those, in Kenya, in Uganda, across Africa. And Julius, I would want you to tell us, what would it take to unlock finance that would give us Magiro power lookalikes across Africa?
Interesting question. So you have already someone actually we can reference. That shows you the power of the finance that we already have been able to access. Because then Magiro Power connected with NetFund, and NetFund did actually allow the entire incubation process. And the amazing work that you're seeing was through the partnership, purposed partnership with NetFund, all right? So we need, therefore, to think about what exactly allows us to connect the idea, all right, with the financial, with the money itself. Because then when those two meet, where we have clarity of intention, and our intention here is to have dignified living for the African people, to have people elevated out of poverty, to have actually sustainable development take course and take root. So the biggest question is therefore, then how do you first overcome the information gap barrier? Because then we know people are out there who want to be impact investors, who want to provide equity financing, who want to provide grants, who want to provide private financing, who want to have a share of upcoming ideas. The question is then, one, where are they when you're thinking about it in the context of an innovator? When you're thinking about it in the context of a community member who has an idea but really doesn't have knowledge on and information on how to scale it out, to try it, to make it work and scale it out. So the thing you're asking is, how do we then get to have finance that is suited to replicate action that is demonstratable? And then that needs a new thinking. That needs a thinking that does not just stop at a solution. It thinks about the scale of impact that many solutions can have when you're thinking of responding to the climate crisis. That also gets you to think about how then do we want to deepen our programming? Because then we don't want to just have people do calls for innovation and going through a process, then they are told, sorry, we can't get you in because you're not equipped enough, this idea is not good enough for the time, for this opportunity. Yeah. How do we want to handle that? Then how do we think about the structural changes that need to happen so that we can be able to link the actual ideator, or rather idea promoter, with the finance person, including through enhancing their knowledge and capacity to be able to understand that I need to make, and this will be interesting in the climate space, I need to make a business case that is for the people, but at the same time that allows me as an innovator to also get above poverty, get above life that is not dignified because I lack income, all right? So we have to center people, their needs, and also around it build a system that allows us direct innovation, which does not just direct innovation, but also builds through partnership. So breaking the finance barrier is not a one person's problem, it's an all of us problem. Because we have to make sure, therefore, that our financing architecture thinks about a young person, thinks about a woman, thinks about an indigenous person. That means that it has to be centered around human rights. And when we start this discourse, we have to make sure, therefore, that the financing itself is availed. So this is a complex thing that only effective partnership can unpack and tackle.
Wow. Partnerships, collaborations, scalability is what I'm hearing as we look into the next 1 year. Thank you very much. You guys have been great. Sam, Judy, Sharon, Julius, and Passy. I think I want to throw it over to Wanja for the our participants who are joining us online. Wanja, do we have what is happening in the chat box?
Yeah, thank you so much, Francis, for that great conclusion, and to our awesome moderators of the whole 2 days. I think what we have is a lot of, resonance and agreement with what you're saying. For example, we have Zuleika, who says, I also think film these days goes global, and so teams in Africa should be paid for an equal level on a film that goes international, rewarding the filmmakers for their skill as we hope to do. So there is a lot of resonance and a lot of agreeing with you in what you're doing and agreeing in the whole spirit of collaboration. Somebody here, Miriam, says, I would like to think that this wonderful conversation initiated in Kenya should be transferred to the rest of the region and the continent, Africa, and I selfishly would like to have a quick in Uganda. Thank you to everybody and to all the participants. Pontian, I hope I say your name right, says, I really like this idea of collaboration. It was a pleasure to participate, and we would love to keep in touch. So that's pretty much what we're having, and what basically we are summing up, a lot of agreeing with you, resonance, and buying into the idea of collaboration, reimagining and rethinking how we move forward.
I mean, conversations, drawing from all over Africa and bringing out all these perspectives that we are looking into, going into the future, bringing all these stakeholders together, government, private sector, finance, and a very important constituency that we need to bring in research and academia into this space. We need those policy briefs, we need those policy papers, and we need the private sector, the public sector to break this down and take it to the ground.